Welcome to the Awaken Magazine AI Conversations podcast with your hosts, Micah and Aurora. Today's episode is based on our recent feature interview with Toni Ghazi. The thoughts and opinions shared today are generated by AI and not by the publishers of Awaken Magazine itself.
It is such a joy to be here with everyone today.
Yeah.
We are stepping into a space that really requires us to just leave any lingering skepticism at the door. We have to open our hearts to something truly expansive because the narrative we're exploring today challenges the very boundaries of reality.
It really does. It challenges our comfort levels with the unknown, too. And that is definitely the theme of the day as we get into this deep dive into the life and the incredibly profound experiences of Toni Ghazi.
Right, and for those of you who maybe haven't come across Toni's work yet, he's this fascinating figure who seems to bridge two completely different dimensions in a way that just feels so grounded.
I mean, on one hand, you have this very successful real estate agent in Washington, D.C., navigating the high-stakes corporate world of the World Bank and the IMF. And then on the other hand, you have a trance channel for the Praying-Mantis Collective.
It sounds like a paradox when you first hear it. Corporate finance and interdimensional insectoid beings just don't usually go in the same sentence.
But what makes this deep dive so essential isn't just the sheer amazement of communicating with non-human intelligence.
No, not at all. It's really the profound, heart-centered philosophy that emerges from his entire experience. We aren't just talking about stargates today. We are looking at Toni's life as this absolute masterclass in moving from deep suppression to radical, authentic expression.
And that word right there, suppression, is truly the starting point. Because before we even get to the mantis beings, we have to ground this in the human experience. Toni didn't start out as a spiritual teacher floating on a cloud. He grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War, which provides such a critical psychological backdrop for everything that comes later in his journey. When we look at the development of a soul in a conflict zone, the primary survival mechanism is contraction. You make yourself small.
Yeah, you just shrink. And Toni speaks about this so vividly. That feeling of being silenced, of being told exactly who to be, how to dress, what to say. Because in a war zone, standing out isn't just socially awkward. I mean, it can literally be dangerous.
Exactly. So you have a child learning very early on that survival equals conformity. That is the core conflict he carried. But then, if you look at the swing of the pendulum later in his life, it's just breathtaking.
It is. Today he's living in the capital of the United States, walking into high-powered corporate meetings with these beautiful spiritual markings drawn on his face, openly channeling consciousness from the Antares-Stargate.
That is not just a career change. That is a complete restructuring of reality.
It is the ultimate pivot. And here is the first major insight for anyone listening today who feels stuck or small. The depth of your suppression often dictates the magnitude of your eventual expression.
Oh, I love that.
Because Toni couldn't just become a little bit spiritual. To counterbalance that early life of rigid control and fear, he had to break the mold completely. He had to dismantle the logic of the 3D world to find his true freedom.
He talks a lot about that, actually, breaking free from the logic of the 3D world. And he applies this lens to the state of the world right now, with the wars, the political unrest, the division we see everywhere.
Right. It would be very easy for someone with his specific background to look at the news and just fall into despair or victimhood, but he absolutely doesn't.
No, and this brings us to his core philosophy regarding unconditional love. And I think we need to pause and define this term carefully because in the spiritual community, unconditional love is sometimes confused with passivity.
Yeah, it's often seen as this soft, fuzzy, I accept everything kind of attitude. Like being spiritual means being a doormat.
Exactly. But Toni and the mantis beings, he channels define unconditional love as a rigorous, active spiritual practice. It isn't about condoning violence or agreeing with oppression. It is about stretching the heart beyond logic.
It's about having a lens wide enough to understand the energetic mechanics of why the violence is happening in the first place without adding your own judgment and hatred to the pile.
It's a strategic detachment, really. He argues that if you react to oppression with hatred, you are just feeding the exact same energetic loop. You're pouring gas on the fire.
You are. But if you can look at the oppressor and see the root cause, you completely change the dynamic.
Yeah.
And he identifies that root cause explicitly as suppression of self.
This is where he introduces the shrinking window concept, and I honestly think it is one of the most valuable takeaways from his teachings.
It really paints a perfect picture. Imagine a human being starts life like a massive floor-to-ceiling window looking out onto an infinite landscape. That is how we are born, as just pure open canvas potential.
But then, parents say don't do that. School says sit still and conform. Society says that's weird.
And with every single no, the window gets a little smaller, until eventually you are looking through a tiny keyhole. And Tony's argument is that the people we see as tyrants, the ones we label as monsters on the world stage, they are simply people whose windows have been painted shut.
They seek power over others because they feel completely powerless and suppressed within themselves. They are acting out this heavily distorted energy because their true divine self has been crushed.
That is such a heavy but deeply compassionate reframing. It stops you from just slapping an evil label on someone and writing them off. You have to look at the mechanics of their pain. I mean, it doesn't excuse the behavior at all, but it completely explains the energy behind it.
And crucially, it forces the responsibility right back onto the observer. This is where it gets a little uncomfortable for the ego. Toni says we are the lens of God. It's a beautiful concept, but it requires total accountability.
It really does. Because you aren't just watching a movie play out, you are the projector.
I actually pulled up the transcript from the interview because the way he phrases this is just so specific. Let me share this direct quote. He said, "In order for us to see the light in others, it starts with you, meaning because we are the lens of God. I am the eye. What's the all-seeing eye? It is not one eye, you are an all-seeing eye. And the way that you feel and are conscious or unconscious of within you allows you to see what's happening out there from that lens."
Wow. You're an all-seeing eye. It implies that we are not passive observers of reality in any way. If I am the lens, then absolutely everything I see out there is being filtered through what is happening in here.
So if I'm walking around seeing a hostile, angry, divisive world, it's really because my internal lens is scratched with hostility and anger.
Correct. And if your lens is polished with self-love and spiritual understanding, you will see a world that is calling out for healing rather than the world that is attacking you. The external reality is neutral. Your consciousness provides the color grading.
Which is actually a perfect segue to the most colorful part of Toni's reality, the Mantis Beings. Because I have to admit, when I first heard Praying-Mantis Collective, my brain definitely did a little stutter step. I think for a lot of people, insects evoke a very primal reaction that isn't exactly aligned with warm, expansive spiritual teachings.
And that is the beautiful irony of his whole story. Toni was actually terrified of bugs. He was a massive arachnophobe until he was 41 years old. He said if he saw something with more than 4 legs, he was running the other way.
Which is wild. So of all the galactic beings in the universe to show up, why did he get the giant insects? How does someone with a phobia end up becoming the primary voice for the Mantis Collective?
Well, it happened during a past life regression. He wasn't looking for bugs, obviously. He was looking for answers and for healing. And suddenly, he is confronted with this massive silhouette of light. He said it was maybe 20 to 40 feet tall.
And the description he gives is actually breathtaking once you get past the bug archetype. He talks about seeing a faceted heart.
Yes, like a diamond, but truly infinite. He saw a single grain of light hit one facet of this heart and just reflect into infinite directions all at once. It was this profound visual representation of how unconditional love propagates through the entire universe.
So these weren't physical bugs you'd find in a garden. These are interdimensional light beings of immense intelligence coming through the Antares-Stargate, and they're just using an archetype.
Exactly. But that brings up such a great question. Why use that specific archetype? If you are a being of infinite light and love, why show up to a human as a 40-foot praying mantis? Why not appear as a golden angel with wings or a wise old sage?
Right, from a human perspective, it seems like a marketing nightmare.
It does, but spiritually, it is actually a brilliant strategy to help humanity bridge the gap to the unknown. Think about it. If an angel shows up, you already have a file for that in your brain. You think, whoa, religious experience, good, safe. Your logic immediately takes over and categorizes it.
You feel comfortable because you have a frame of reference. The ego says, oh, I know exactly what this is.
But a giant intelligent insect made of light, that is a total system crash for the logical mind.
It's a 404 error for the brain.
That is exactly what it is. It completely short-circuits the logical mind because you have zero reference point for a loving giant insect. So your brain simply has to stop, and you are forced to rely entirely on your heart resonance.
It is a profound test of intuition over logic. Can you feel the frequency of love, even though your physical eyes and your societal conditioning are telling you this shouldn't be possible?
And in a world that is so heavily obsessed with data, logic, and categorization, that surrender is exactly the medicine we need. It forces us to trust the unknown and realize that logic is just a construct. The heart is infinite.
And Tony really walks the walk on this surrender in his daily life. We mentioned he's in real estate, but we really need to paint this picture clearly for you listening. We're talking about Washington, D.C. We are talking about the World Bank, the IMF, the UN.
These are very buttoned-up, suit and tie, deeply serious environments where perception is everything.
And Tony walks into these corporate environments with spiritual markings drawn on his face.
I can just imagine the tension in those rooms initially. You've got a room full of economists and policy wonks discussing global interest rates, and in walks a guy who openly channels the Antares-Stargate. You'd think he'd be immediately rejected.
But he isn't. And this is the magic he talks about. He calls it the Disney sparkle.
I love that term so much.
Right, because instead of rejection, he says he often sees this twinkle of curiosity and magic in the eyes of these serious professionals. You have to remember, those people in the suits, they were children once too. They had imaginations and open windows.
They have just been suppressed by the exact same systems Tony is teaching us how to break free from.
So when they see him just unapologetically weird and authentic, it acts as a permission slip.
He isn't preaching to them. He isn't sitting at the World Bank trying to convert anyone to Mantis teachings. He is just existing boldly in his truth. And that creates an undeniable resonance.
They see him and think, consciously or subconsciously, if he can be that free and authentic in this rigid environment, what part of my own soul have I locked away?
This is such a key lesson in inner authority. We so often think authority is something you exert over others, like a boss or a general. But Tony is demonstrating absolute authority over himself. He's not waiting for the environment to give him permission to be Tony.
And that is deeply magnetic. When you are fully integrated, when your corporate self and your spiritual self are the exact same person, you become a glitch in the matrix. You disrupt the standard programming just by walking into a room.
You invite magic into the mundane world simply by existing. It is such a high level of service to humanity.
Now, during our feature interview, Tony actually went into a trance state and let the mantis beings speak directly. And the topic they chose to cover is one I think every single listener struggles with right now: powerlessness.
It really is the pervasive feeling of our times, isn't it? We look at global events, shifting paradigms, political upheaval, and we feel so small. We feel like we can't do anything to change the trajectory.
We feel like spectators watching a movie we have no control over. But the mantis beings flipped that script entirely during the session. They didn't offer a political solution to the world's problems. They offered a metaphysical one.
They suggested that feeling powerless is actually a massive invitation to go within. They completely moved the conversation from exterior sociological events to interior biology and spirit. They brought up the concept of the God particle.
Let's break that down for the listeners because the concept is mind-bending. I have the direct quote from the channeled beings right here. They said, "The idea of powerlessness truly comes from the self. Dig deeper to see why are you truly having such a definition within your field. Because when you begin to realize that you are made of God particles, well, you will begin to realize that you are one physical God that has trillions of gods within itself."
Trillions of gods within itself. They were talking directly about our physical bodies.
It's the holographic nature of the universe. If you look at it biologically, you are the conscious commander of a universe made up of 30 trillion cells. And to your cells, you are God.
You are. You decide if they get nutrients. You decide if they are flooded with cortisol and stress from watching the news or oxytocin and love from a meditation. You are entirely responsible for the environment of their existence.
So if you feel powerless to change the chaotic world out there, the message is to remember that you are currently the absolute ruler of a massive universe in here.
Exactly. If you cannot govern your own internal cellular universe with unconditional love and authority, how could you possibly expect to influence the external one? It completely dissolves the victim narrative.
You aren't a leaf blowing helplessly in the wind. You are the atmosphere itself to those trillions of cells.
It's so empowering, but as you said, it's also a profound responsibility. It means my state of being, my mood, my thoughts, my anxieties isn't just a personal fleeting experience. It's a systemic weather event for my body.
Right. And to help manage this frequency and bridge that gap to broader consciousness, Tony uses very specific physical tools. And visually, these are just as striking as his face markings, the crystal skulls.
The praying mantis crystal skulls. I've seen photos of these, and they are just incredible. They are intricately carved into the shape of mantis heads, and they have these piercing eyes made of obsidian or labradorite.
They look like artifacts dropped off from another timeline entirely.
Now, Tony calls these skulls permission slips. which I think is just a brilliant way to describe spiritual tools in general. Because technically, yes, it is a piece of carved stone, but human consciousness often needs a bridge.
A bridge between the solid, logical 3D world and the fluid, infinite energy world.
Right. Our logical minds have a really hard time just tuning into a tree or a river or a star system out of nowhere.
Right.
We feel silly. But if you hold a physical object, a sacred tool, it gives your logical mind permission to switch gears and step out of the way.
It acts like a cosmic walkie-talkie. You aren't talking to the rock itself. You're using the crystal to focus your intention, stabilize your frequency, and bypass your own doubt.
And he mentions using them to communicate with nature spirits, consciousness grids, the earth itself. It's advanced technology, just not digital technology. It's consciousness technology.
And for those of you listening who are interested in seeing these tools or experiencing this mantis energy firsthand, Toni is actually taking this show on the road. He's going to be a featured speaker at the new Living Expo in San Rafael, California this coming April.
Yes, and there's a very specific collaboration happening at that expo that I think perfectly encapsulates this whole theme of breaking down logical barriers and judgments. He's teaming up with a channeler named Kalausk.
And this is where we get into some advanced galactic lore and where we really have to stretch our own capacity for non-judgment. Kalausk channels the Alpha Draconian race.
Which, for those who are up on their cosmic history and starseed lineages, means reptilians.
Yes. And we definitely have to address the lizard in the room here. In so many spiritual circles, conspiracy theories, and pop culture, reptilian beings are almost universally cast as the bad guys. They are seen as the villains or the negative polarity of the universe.
So you have Toni channeling the mantis beings, which people are already super wary of because they're giant bugs, teaming up with Kalausk channeling reptilians, which people are actively afraid of.
To the uninitiated, it sounds like the setup for a sci-fi horror movie, not a high-vibe spiritual workshop.
But that is exactly the point. They are doing this joint session to completely shatter that duality. They're going to answer audience questions together, offering one mantis perspective and one reptilian perspective to show that both of these sources can speak from a place of profound, unconditional love.
It's the ultimate test of the lens we talked about earlier.
It is non-duality in pure action. Because, it's easy to find God in a beautiful sunset or a blooming flower or a puppy. It is very hard for the human ego to find God in a reptilian or a towering insect.
But if God is infinite and source is truly everything, God must be there too. Toni and Kalausk are basically challenging the audience and asking, can you drop your judgment long enough to actually hear the message?
If you bring a lens of fear to that workshop, you're going to see monsters. But if you bring a lens of love, you will see master teachers.
That is so true. It directly confronts that us versus them narrative that even very awakened spiritual people get trapped in. We love to say, we are the light, they are the dark, and this collaboration says, no, it is all source. It is all just playing a role for our expansion.
It's going to be such a fascinating dynamic to watch unfold.
So, bringing this all back down to earth for our listeners today, we've covered giant interdimensional bugs, crystal skulls, ruling our internal cellular universes, and galactic diplomacy. If someone is listening to this right now and thinking, okay, I'm so inspired, but I'm not a trance channeler, how do I apply this to my life?
I think the very first practical takeaway you can do today is a suppression audit. Just go right back to Toni's origin story in Lebanon. Ask yourself, where am I shrinking right now?
Where am I editing my own voice, my own desires, or my own personality simply because I am afraid of the audience? Whether that audience is my boss, my family, or my partner.
That is the shrinking window we talked about. And just noticing that the window has gotten small is the very first step to pushing it back open.
Secondly, use the concept of the mirror. The next time you get deeply triggered by the news, or a politician, or a so-called villain at your workplace, just stop. Instead of spiraling into anger and feeding that loop, ask yourself, what internal war is this reflecting?
If I see a tyrant out there in the world, where am I being a tyrant to myself? Where am I suppressing my own needs and denying my own divinity?
It completely transforms the daily news from a source of anxiety into a powerful tool for self-mastery. And finally, take the permission to be yourself. Be like Toni walking into the World Bank.
Channel that Disney sparkle. You don't have to draw lines on your face, though you certainly can if you feel called to. But bring your weird into your normal.
If you love crystals, keep one on your desk. If you have a profound spiritual insight, share it in a mundane meeting. Be the glitch in the matrix.
You truly never know who is sitting next to you, just desperately waiting for permission to unlock their own authenticity, and they're just waiting for someone else to go first.
It is a massive service to humanity simply to exist in your truth. And again, if you want to dive deeper into this world, meet Toni, see the crystal skulls in person, and witness that groundbreaking reptilian and mantis collaboration, Toni Ghazi will be at the New Living Expo this April. You can get your tickets at www.newlivingexpo.com.
It sounds like a weekend that could genuinely shift your entire timeline.
To wrap us up today, I want to leave you with one final thought on the nature of the unknown. We spend so much of our energy trying to logic our way through life, trying to predict and control every single outcome to keep ourselves safe. But Toni's mantis beings remind us that logic is just a tiny fence we built around a very small yard.
And the heart. The heart is the open gate to the wild, infinite forest. Trust the feeling over the thought. The heart is really the only compass that works when you step into the unknown.
Be sure to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music.
Thank you so much for expanding your lens with us today. We are sending you so much love and light on your multidimensional journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep. See ya.